The grand sanctum of the Cathar Imperium hummed with a silence more profound than any sound. It was a chamber carved from the heart of a captured moon, its walls weeping threads of starlight filtered through crystalline veins that ran through the living rock. Here, suspended in the gravitic center, the High Concordance convened, a council of beings so ancient their thoughts moved with the deliberate gravity of tectonic plates. High Scion Valerius of the Cathar floated in his designated field, his multi-jointed form folded in a posture of deep contemplation, the translucent membranes of his respiratory gills pulsing with a slow, measured rhythm. Before him, the holographic representation of the galaxy shimmered, a swirling vortex of blues and golds, but all eyes, all sensory organs, all psychic tendrils were focused on a single, unremarkable point of darkness within the Perseus arm, a system designated only by a cold, numerical identifier. It was a stellar graveyard, home to a single, lightless cinder of a star, a white dwarf so old it had cooled to near absolute zero. And it was here that humanity, the Concordance's youngest, most volatile members, were committing an act of cosmic insanity. Debate had raged for what felt like an eternity, a storm of carefully modulated voices and precisely articulated condemnations. The Viridian Assembly, beings of pure energy contained within crystalline lattices, argued from a position of pure logic. Their representative, a shimmering column of emerald light, spoke in tones that resonated with the very structure of the chamber. The energy expenditure is indefensible, the resources being diverted from viable, life-sustaining systems to this. Void represent a dereliction of their custodial duties to the galactic commons. They are squandering the inheritance of stars on a tomb. The argument was sound, unassailable in its pragmatism. The Concordance had spent millennia cultivating a delicate balance of resource management, ensuring the slow, sustainable bloom of life across the spiral arms. Humanity's project was a grotesque aberration, a feast in a time of galactic famine. From the opposite side of the chamber, the armored form of the Glyptodan warlord, whose species had forged an empire from conquest before discovering the subtler arts of diplomacy, slammed a gauntleted fist onto his floating dais. The impact sent a dull, metallic clang through the silent air. Logic is a tool, not a god, Viridian. I see not waste, but ambition. An ambition that borders on aggression. What purpose could such a megastructure serve around a dead star? It is not a collector of energy, for there is none to collect. It is not a habitat, for it is a realm of absolute cold. Therefore, it must be a fortress, a staging ground, a weapon of unimaginable scale, hidden in the dark where our sensors are weakest. His voice, a low, grinding sound like continents shifting, echoed the primordial fear that had slithered into the heart of every elder race present. Humans were unpredictable. They had risen from their muddy death world with a speed that defied evolutionary theory, their technology a chaotic patchwork of brute force innovation and baffling leaps of intuition. They thought in flashes, in bursts of inspiration and desperation, while the rest of the galaxy thought in sweeping, geological epochs. Valerius remained silent, his ancient mind sifting through the layers of fear and suspicion. He had been the one to sponsor humanity's entry into the Concordance, arguing that their unique perspective, their furious, burning short lifespans, could be a catalyst for new thinking. He had seen their art, read their philosophies, felt the profound sorrow and boundless hope that warred within their collective consciousness. He had believed them to be a force for renewal. Now he felt the weight of 1,000 worlds' doubt pressing down on him. The data streams projected before him were chilling in their starkness. A swarm of construction habitats, like metallic gnats, flitted around the dead star. They were weaving a lattice of incomprehensible complexity, a filigree of metal and exotic matter that was slowly, piece by piece, beginning to enclose the stellar remnant. It was the genesis of a shell, a sphere, an artificial world built in the coldest, darkest, most lifeless place they could find. The world doubted them, and Valerius, for the first time in his long existence, was beginning to understand why. He finally stirred, his voice a soft, resonant whisper that cut through the lingering echoes of the warlord's accusation. Fear is a prism that distorts light, warlord, and logic Viridian can only build with the bricks of known information. We have neither. His gaze swept across the assembled delegates, beings of gas and crystal, of flesh and steel. We have requested an explanation. We have transmitted official inquiries on every sanctioned frequency. We have been met with polite, professional silence. They have not denied our requests. They have simply deferred them. They say they will answer when the first phase of their work is complete. A delay tactic, the warlord boomed. They build their citadel while we drown in procedure. Or, Valerius countered, his voice steady, they are waiting until they can provide an answer that is not a theory but a fact, until they can show us, not merely tell us. But even as he spoke the words, a cold tendril of doubt coiled in his core. The scale of the project was what truly staggered the imagination. The raw materials being processed, the mass being moved, exceeded the total industrial output of entire star systems. Fleets of automated haulers, vast, silent leviathans of space, were arriving from human territory, their cargo holds filled with refined asteroids and the processed cores of dead planets. They were systematically deconstructing their own barren worlds to build this monument to nothing. It was a level of commitment that spoke of a belief so absolute it was indistinguishable from madness. The humans were not just investing resources. They were investing their future, their entire civilization's effort, into a single point of absolute darkness. The luminary of the Cygnian ascendancy, a being of woven light and thought who communicated in pure telepathic resonance, projected its consciousness into the chamber. The sensation was like cool water washing over the mind. They are a species defined by legacy. Their short lives grant them a frantic obsession with what comes after. They build monuments, write histories, create art that they themselves will never see the final interpretation of. Perhaps this is merely that impulse magnified to a galactic scale. A tombstone for their sun, for their species, a final, defiant gesture against the encroaching silence of the universe. The thought was poetic, melancholic, and it resonated with a part of Valerius. He had studied their histories. They were filled with such grand, tragic gestures, but this felt different. It was too quiet, too deliberate. There was no defiance in the slow, silent ballet of the construction drones. There was only a serene, unyielding purpose. The debate cycled again, arguments wearing down like stone under a slow river. Hours turned into cycles, cycles into shifts. The holographic star cinder remained, a dark heart around which humanity's impossible dream or nightmare was taking shape. Valerius closed his primary eyes, focusing his inner senses on the torrent of data. He tried to see past the numbers, past the spectrographic analyses and the gravimetric distortions. He tried to feel the intention behind the act. He remembered the first human delegate he had ever met, an old woman with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 sorrows and a smile that seemed to defy them all. She had spoken of hope not as a passive wish, but as an act of will and ethical duty. "We build the future we wish to inhabit," she had told him, her voice frail but her conviction like steel. "Even if we know we will not live to see it. It is the only way to prove it is possible." Was this that philosophy made manifest? A future built in the one place where time itself seemed to have stopped. The thought was both terrifying and beautiful, a paradox that lay at the very heart of the human condition. And as the concordance descended once more into a gridlock of fear and logic, Valerius knew only one thing for certain. The answer, when it finally came, would change the galaxy forever. The silence from humanity was not an absence of communication. It was the deep, patient breath before the word is spoken. The message arrived without fanfare. It was not a grand pronouncement or a defiant retort, but a simple, formal invitation. A single human vessel, it stated, had detached from their construction fleet and was en route to the Cathar Imperium's capital system. It carried their designated ambassador, who would address the High Concordance directly. The message was concise, professional, and offered no preamble or justification. It was a statement of fact, as calm and unyielding as the project they were undertaking. The Glyptodan warlord had argued it was a trap, that the ship must be a Trojan horse carrying some esoteric weapon. The Viridian Assembly calculated the statistical improbability of a single, unarmed vessel being sent into the heart of a deeply unsettled galactic superpower, concluding it was an act of either supreme confidence or supreme foolishness. Valerius, however, felt a strange sense of relief. The waiting was over, the breath was ending. The human ship was a masterpiece of understated design. Unlike the aggressive, angular warships of the warlord's fleet or the shimmering, ethereal vessels of the energy beings, the human ship was a smooth, obsidian needle, absorbing all light and sensor readings. It moved with a grace that belied its mass, settling into a high orbit around the sanctum, as if it were a native celestial body. There were no hails, no broadcasted pleasantries. It simply waited, a silent black sliver against the tapestry of the nebulae. The invitation had been for their ambassador to address the council. It was an offer the Concordance had to accept, for to refuse would be an admission of fear, an act of overt hostility that would escalate the situation beyond control. And so the chamber was prepared. The gravitic fields were recalibrated. The air shields were raised. The delegates of 100 worlds gathered once more. the tension in the sanctum so thick it felt like a physical pressure. When the transport field shimmered into existence at the chamber's center, it deposited a single figure. It was a human female, dressed in a simple dark gray uniform that bore no insignia, no rank, no mark of status. She was of middling height, her hair the color of silvered frost, pulled back from a face that was a mask of serene composure. Her eyes, a pale, piercing blue, swept across the assembly of alien forms without a flicker of fear or awe. She seemed neither intimidated by the grandeur of the sanctum nor impressed by the beings who inhabited it. She was simply present. Valerius felt a ripple of disbelief from the assembled minds. They had expected a military official, a stern politician, a scientist ready to baffle them with data. They had not expected this quiet, unassuming woman who carried with her an aura of profound calm. "I am Ambassador Evelyn Reed," she said, her voice clear and even, requiring no technological amplification to fill the vast chamber. It was not loud, but it possessed a strange quality of resonance, a clarity that seemed to cut through the ambient hum of the station and the agitated thoughts of the delegates. "I speak for the collective of Terra. I thank you for agreeing to this meeting." The Glyptodan warlord was the first to break the stunned silence. His voice was a low growl of impatience. "We did not agree to a meeting, human. We have demanded an explanation. Your species is engaged in an act of unprecedented recklessness. You are destabilizing the resource economy of this galactic arm and constructing a potential weapon of mass destruction in violation of concordance treaties. Cease your evasions and justify your actions." Ambassador Reed turned her head slowly to face the warlord. Her expression did not change. There was no anger, no defensiveness, only a quiet, unnerving stillness. "We are not in violation of any treaties, warlord. The system in which we are working is unclaimed and holds no strategic value. Our project is not a weapon, and we are not being reckless." She paused, letting her words settle into the silent chamber. "We are being meticulous." The Veridian representative shimmered, its light pulsing with analytical fervor. "Your project's energy consumption is mathematically unsustainable. The heatsink calculations alone suggest you are venting waste energy equivalent to the output of a small star, yet you are drawing power from no visible source. Your material logistics defy known principles of supply chain efficiency. Your actions are, by every metric we possess, illogical." Evelyn Reed offered the faintest hint of a smile, a slight upward turn at the corner of her lips that did not quite reach her eyes. "Your metrics, representative, are based on an incomplete data set. You assume our goal is efficiency in the present. It is not. Our goal is permanence in the future." She turned her gaze back towards the center of the chamber, addressing them all. "You have asked for an explanation. I will provide one. But to understand our actions, you must first understand a fundamental principle of human philosophy. We believe that life is the universe's most profound and beautiful accident, a fragile, fleeting candle in an infinite, cold darkness. And we believe it is the sacred duty of any intelligence that arises from that accident to protect the flame, not just for itself, but for all that might come after." Valerius felt a shift in the chamber's atmosphere. The aggression was momentarily replaced by a deep, collective confusion. This was not the language of empire, of strategy, or of science. It was the language of priests and poets. "You have observed our work," Reed continued, her voice taking on a slightly deeper, more resonant tone. "You see a sphere being constructed around a dead star. You call it a fortress, a weapon, a monument. You are incorrect on all counts. It is a shelter, a vault, a library. We call it the Silentium Arboretum." She raised her hand, and the central holographic display, which had shown the stark image of the construction site, flickered and changed. It now showed a complex, rotating schematic of the sphere's interior. It was not a hollow shell. The inner surface was a vast, layered lattice of simulated environments. There were oceans suspended in zero-gravity fields, continents bathed in the artificial of a central fusion core, and ecosystems that defied terrestrial biology, clearly designed to house life forms from across the galaxy. It was a world inside a world, an arc of impossible scale. "You see a dead star," Reed said softly, her voice a counterpoint to the breathtaking image. "We see the perfect anchor. A white dwarf that has radiated away its heat over eons is the most stable object in the universe, second only to a black hole. It will not go nova. It will not swell into a red giant. It will remain placid and predictable for trillions of years, long after every other star in this galaxy has guttered and died. Its immense gravity provides the perfect foundation for a structure designed to last into the deep future." The Glyptodan warlord grunted, his skepticism undiminished. "Azu, You are bankrupting your civilization to build a zoo. Not a zoo, warlord. A seed bank, Reed corrected him gently. We are not collecting creatures. We are preserving the foundational data of life itself, the genetic codes, the biological blueprints, the quantum states of every species we have ever encountered, including our own, including every one of yours. The implication of her words washed over the assembly like a tidal wave. They had been scanning human ships, cataloging their technology. But the humans, with their quiet, unobtrusive deep range sensors, had been cataloging them on a far more fundamental level. The Arboretum is designed to be a self-contained, self-repairing repository of all known biological information. Its purpose is not to function now in the age of light, but to endure, to survive the end of this galaxy, to survive the end of all galaxies, to carry the memory of life across the unfathomable gulf of time into whatever new universe may one day be born from the ashes of this one. A profound, shattering silence descended upon the grand sanctum. The Viridian's light ceased its pulsing, frozen in a state of static emerald. The warlord's armored form was utterly still. Even the telepathic hum of the luminary was quiet. Valerius felt as if the floor of his reality had just fallen away. He had considered every possibility, military, economic, political, even religious fanaticism. He had never, in all his millennia of existence, conceived of this. It was an act of such audacious, selfless, and utterly insane foresight that it defied all known models of civilized behavior. They were not building for their children or their children's children. They were building for a theoretical future so distant that the very concept of time lost its meaning. You question our energy source, Ambassador Reed said, her voice pulling them from their collective stupor. She gestured to a part of the schematic that showed the outer shell of the sphere. The outer layer is not armor. It is a quantum foam collector, a technology we have developed in secret. It draws zero-point energy directly from the vacuum of spacetime. It is inefficient, unstable over short periods, and utterly useless for powering a starship or a city. But for a project that has trillions of years to accumulate power, it is infinite. We are not consuming galactic resources. We are sipping from the ocean of the universe itself. This was the great reveal, not just the purpose of the project, but the technology that made it possible. A power source that broke known laws of thermodynamics, a quiet revolution that they had hidden from the galaxy not for military advantage, but to complete an act of cosmic altruism. They hadn't shared it because they knew it would be weaponized, that the races of the Concordance would immediately turn it to conquest and war. They had sheltered their greatest discovery, using it only for this single, monumental purpose. Valerius looked at the calm human woman, and for the first time he understood. He understood the art, the philosophy, the desperate hope he had seen in them. They lived with the acute awareness of their own mortality, a fire that drove them not just to live, but to ensure that life itself would not be forgotten. The other races of the Concordance, with their lifespans measured in eons, had grown complacent. They saw the universe as a stable, permanent home. They had forgotten the truth that every human felt in their bones from the moment they were born. Everything ends. And because they knew this truth so intimately, they were the only ones with the courage to face it, to plan for it, to build a fortress of memory against the final, inevitable night. The luminary's thought finally rippled through the chamber, no longer cool and analytical, but filled with a profound, soul-shaking awe. You are building a soul for the universe. Evelyn Reed met the unseeable gaze of the being of light and gave a slow, respectful nod. We are, she said, her voice soft but absolute. The world doubted us, so we are building a new one to remember the old. The shift in the grand sanctum was not immediate. It was a slow, dawning realization, like a tide turning on a continental scale. The arguments of the Glyptod warlord, once so powerful and resonant with the chamber's fear, now seemed small and petty. His talk of fortresses and weapons was the sputtering of a candle in the face of a rising sun. The Viridian Assembly's logical objections, their precise calculations of waste and inefficiency, collapsed into meaninglessness when the time frame shifted from centuries to trillions of years. What was the squandering of a few barren moons now, when measured against the preservation of all life for eternity? The very foundations of galactic politics, built on the careful hoarding of resources and the suspicion of neighbors, seemed suddenly like the bickering of children in the face of a truly adult endeavor. High Scion Valerius was the first to give voice to this new reality. He unfolded his form from its contemplative posture, his full, majestic height a statement of authority and newfound conviction. He turned not to the human ambassador, but to his fellow members of the High Concordance. His voice, which had been a moderating whisper, now filled the chamber with the weight of his ancient lineage. For millennia, we have called ourselves the custodians of the galaxy. We have created laws to govern the expansion of empires, treaties to limit the proliferation of arms, and economic pacts to ensure the stability of civilizations. We have built a quiet, orderly garden, and we have congratulated ourselves on our wisdom. Paused, letting the silence amplify his next words. And in all that time, in all our long, self-congratulatory lives, not one of us, not a single one, ever thought to ask the most important question. What do we do when the garden dies? What is our plan for the coming of the final winter? He gestured with a long, graceful limb toward Ambassador Reed, who stood with the same unnerving calm as before, an island of stillness in a sea of revelation. We looked at humanity and saw chaos. We saw ambition. We saw reckless, emotional children playing with fire at the edge of our well-tended garden. We were wrong. We were the children. We were the ones playing with toys, while they, the youngest among us, were the only ones looking up at the sky and seeing the coming storm. His gaze fell upon the Glyptotan warlord. You saw a weapon, warlord, but a weapon is a tool for taking. This arboretum is a tool for giving, an inheritance for a universe yet unborn. He then turned to the shimmering Viridian. You saw illogical waste, but the only true waste is to live a long life and leave nothing of value behind. The humans, in their fleeting, ephemeral existence, have understood a truth that has eluded our eons of logic, that the ultimate purpose of intelligence is not to secure its own survival, but to ensure that the memory of life itself survives. A murmur moved through the chamber, a cascade of 1,000 different forms of communication, subvocalizations, shifting light patterns, psychic whispers. It was a sound of consensus, of a paradigm shattering and reforming into something new, something grander. The warlord of the Glyptotan Empire, a being whose entire culture was predicated on martial pride, slowly, deliberately, lowered his head in a gesture of profound respect. The Viridian's emerald light softened, its rigid analytical pulse giving way to a warm, steady glow of acceptance. The message was clear. The Concordance was no longer an assembly of judges. It was now an audience of supplicants. Valerius turned at last to Ambassador Reed. Your project, he said, his voice now imbued with a humility that no one in the chamber had ever heard from a Cathar High Scion. The Silentium Arboretum, it is no longer a human project. It cannot be. A task of this magnitude, of this sacred importance, does not belong to one species. It belongs to all of us. The Cathar Imperium offers its knowledge of gravitational engineering and deep-time material science. We will help you build your shelter. We will help you build it to last. One by one, the other delegates followed. The Glyptotan warlord offered the might of his fleets, not for war but for logistics, to move the mass of worlds required for the construction. The Viridian Assembly pledged their mastery of energy systems, to refine and stabilize the unpredictable flow of zero-point energy. The Signian luminary offered its vast, psychic network, a living library of consciousness to aid in the cataloging of life, to store not just the genetic data, but the essence, the sentience, the very soul of a species. What had begun as an interrogation had transformed into the founding of the most ambitious alliance in galactic history. Humanity had not come to the Concordance to ask for help. They had come to give the galaxy a purpose, a reason for being that transcended petty squabbles over territory and resources. In the cycles that followed, the dark system of the cooled white dwarf was transformed. It was no longer a lonely, forgotten corner of the galaxy. It became a nexus, a pilgrimage site. The fleets of a dozen civilizations now moved in a harmonious, complex dance around the growing sphere. Cathar engineers worked alongside human physicists. Viridian energy weavers consulted with human quantum mechanics. The project accelerated, its scale growing beyond even humanity's original audacious vision. It was no longer just a human dream. It had become the galaxy's final, unifying prayer. Valerius stood with Ambassador Reed on the observation deck of his flagship, a vessel now permanently stationed to oversee the Cathar contribution. The vast, curved window looked out upon the Arboretum. The sphere was now almost a quarter complete, a growing crescent of impossible technology that eclipsed the distant stars. It was a sight of breathtaking beauty, a new world being born in the husk of an old one. I confess, Ambassador, Valerius said, his voice a low, contemplative hum. There is still one thing I do not fully comprehend, the timing. Your species has possessed the theoretical knowledge for this project for centuries. Your zero-point energy technology, while a recent breakthrough, could have been developed sooner had you devoted your full resources to it. Why now? Why this sudden, frantic urgency to begin a project that will take millennia to complete? Evelyn Reed was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the great work outside. The reflection of the nascent sphere swam in her pale blue eyes. She seemed to be weighing her words, not out of secrecy, but as if trying to find the proper way to convey a truth that was heavier than a star. "Because we were not the first to have this idea," she said at last, her voice barely a whisper. "The Arboretum is our answer, but we were not the ones who asked the question." Valerius turned to her, his sensory membranes contracting in surprise. "I do not understand." "A few years ago," she began, her tone measured and somber, "one of our deep-range listening arrays stationed far out in the intergalactic void picked up a signal. It was not directed at us. It was not directed at anyone. It was a broadcast, omnidirectional, repeated on an impossibly long cycle. It was also incredibly old. The redshift calculations dated it to a time before our own sun had even coalesced from its stellar nursery. Billions of years old." She turned from the window to face him, and for the first time, Valeria saw a flicker of profound, ancient sorrow in her eyes. "It took us years to decode it. It wasn't a language of words, but of mathematics, of fundamental physics, and of art. It was a message from a civilization that we now call the precursors. A civilization that rose, flourished, and died in this galaxy long before the first cell of life ever stirred on our world, or yours." She gestured toward a small console, and a new image appeared in the air between them. It was not a schematic or a data stream. It was a sound, translated into a visual waveform, a complex, melancholic pattern of light. "The signal is a recording," she explained. "Their final testament. It contains their science, their art, their history. It tells the story of their rise and their inevitable, slow decline as the universe aged around them. They watched their neighboring stars die. They watched the galaxies drift apart. They faced the prospect of the heat death of the universe, the final, endless silence." Valerius felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature of space. He was listening to the echo of a ghost, a voice from a time so remote it was almost mythological. "Their final transmission," Reed said, her own voice cracking with an empathy that crossed the chasm of ages, "is not a warning. It is not a cry for help. It is a lament, a philosophical treatise on the tragedy of existence. It is the sound of an entire civilization weeping as it faces extinction, not by war or plague, but by the slow, inexorable winding down of everything. And their last words, translated from the universal language of mathematics into our own, form a question." She fell silent, and the recording in the air seemed to pulse with a silent, sorrowful power. Valerius found himself holding his breath, a reflexive action he had not performed in centuries. "The question is this," Ambassador Reed said, her voice now filled with the immense gravity of the revelation. "Was any of it real? Did we matter? When the last light is gone and the last particle has decayed, will there be anything left to prove that we were ever here? Will the universe remember us?" The question hung in the air, an existential weight of unimaginable density. It was the ultimate fear of every thinking being, spoken by a people who had actually faced it. "Our scientists, our philosophers, our artists, our entire species was shaken to its core," Reed continued. "We had been given the final message of a long-dead God, and it was a cry of despair. We could not answer them. They were gone, their dust scattered across 1 billion light-years. But we realized we could answer the question itself, not for them, but for everyone who came after." He turned her gaze back to the impossible structure growing in the void. "The Silentium Arboretum is our answer. When a child cries in the dark, you do not prove to them that the darkness is not real. You light a candle, you build a fire, you show them that light is possible. This is our candle. This is our answer to the precursor's despair. We are building a place where the universe will be forced to remember. We are telling them across the gulf of death and time, yes, you were real. Yes, you mattered. And we will not let you be forgotten." Valerius stared at the Arboretum, but he no longer saw metal and energy. He saw a promise. He saw an act of love so profound it defied the limits of mortality. The humans had heard a whisper from the dawn of time and had chosen to answer it with a shout that would echo into eternity. The world had doubted them because the world had not been listening to the same ghosts. He finally looked back at Evelyn Reed, and his ancient alien features arranged themselves into an expression for which his species had no word but which humans would have recognized instantly. It was awe. "Your short lives," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We always saw it as your weakness, the source of your impulsiveness, your frantic ambition. We were so wrong. It is the source of your greatest strength. You are all born with the memory of the darkness before you and the certainty of the darkness to come. And so you, of all of us, are the only ones who truly understand the value of the light. Together, they watch the fleets of a united galaxy work in silent, purposeful harmony, building their shared answer to the universe's oldest question. They were no longer just building a structure. They were building a reason. And in the heart of that cold, dead system, under the silent gaze of a long-extinguished star, the races of the galaxy, led by the short-lived, loud-hearted humans, began their sacred work of pushing back the night.